In the rugged depths of Nevada's Red Rock Canyon, folks pitied Old Jack Hawkins with his toothless grin and weathered appearance, thinking decades of prospecting the abandoned mines had left him with nothing but dust and broken dreams. Through the grimy windows of the Rattlesnake Saloon, they'd watch him shuffle in each dawn for his morning coffee, his calloused hands trembling slightly as he counted out worn pennies and nickels. But the rowdy motorcycle gang that decided to torment him, that scorching summer morning, had no idea they were taunting one of the most legendary explosives experts in the U.S. Special Forces, a man who had spent 30 years mapping every abandoned mine shaft and tunnel beneath the vast desert landscape they now claimed as their territory. What began as cruel harassment at a local watering hole would spiral into a high-stakes game of cat and mouse through the treacherous underground labyrinth of Red Rock Canyon, testing the limits of redemption and teaching them the true meaning of power. When the Desert Scorpions Motorcycle Club pushed too far, they didn't just pick a fight with a seemingly helpless old prospector. They unknowingly triggered a chain of events that would expose the dark underbelly of their criminal empire, challenge their iron grip on the region, and reveal how dangerously they had underestimated a man who knew every deadly secret buried beneath the desert sands. Sometimes the most dangerous predators aren't the ones who roar the loudest, but the quiet ones who've spent years preparing for the perfect moment to strike. And sometimes the most formidable warriors are the ones everyone dismisses as broken and powerless. The morning heat already shimmered across the cracked parking lot of the Rattlesnake Saloon as Jack Hawkins made his way through the entrance, the rusty bell above the door announcing his arrival with a familiar clang. His sun-weathered hands, marked by decades of working the mines, gripped a few tarnished coins as he shuffled to his usual spot at the corner of the bar. The clock read 6:30 a.m., same as it had every morning for the past 12 years. Sarah Martinez looked up from behind the bar, her warm smile as much a part of the morning ritual as the coffee she was already pouring. "Right on schedule, Jack," she said, placing the steaming cup before him. "One of these days you'll have to tell me how you manage to arrive at exactly the same minute every morning." The old prospector's toothless grin flashed briefly. "Military precision dies hard, Sarah. Some habits you never shake." His voice was soft, gravelly from years of desert dust, but carried an underlying strength that most missed. The saloon was quiet at this hour, just a handful of regulars scattered among the worn wooden tables. Jack could name each one, knew their stories, their routines. Tom Wilson, the local mail carrier, always occupied the booth by the window, reading his paper before starting his route. Margaret Chen, the retired schoolteacher, nursed her tea in the corner, working on her daily crossword puzzle. The peace shattered with the roar of multiple engines outside, the thunderous rumble of custom motorcycles echoing off the canyon walls. Through the dusty window, Jack watched as 5 bikes pulled into the lot, gleaming machines custom painted with scorpion emblems, their riders dressed in leather despite the desert heat. The Desert Scorpions had arrived early today, unusually early. "Those animals again," Sarah muttered, her expression darkening. "Third time this week they've shown up at dawn. Usually they're still sleeping off whatever chaos they caused the night before." Jack observed silently as the group entered, the bell's gentle chime drowned out by their heavy boots and louder voices. Marcus "Venom" Rodriguez led the pack, his 6'4" frame dominating the doorway. The Scorpions had made their name running protection rackets throughout Red Rock County, their influence growing as law enforcement looked the other way. "Well, look what we got here," Marcus announced, voice carrying deliberately across the saloon. "Morning crowd's looking pretty sad today, boys. Guess this is where you end up when you've got nothing better to do than play in the dirt." His followers laughed on cue. Mike Stinger Torres, his right-hand man, Derek Poison Phillips, whose father mysteriously disappeared after refusing to sell his ranch, and the Castro brothers, Ray and Luis, known for their particular brand of brutal enforcement. Sarah stepped forward, coffee pot held like a shield. "You boys planning to order something or just practicing your comedy routine?" "Relax, Sarah," Marcus replied, sprawling into a booth. "We're paying customers. 5 coffees, eggs all around. Unless that's too complicated for the morning crew." Jack sipped his coffee, attention seemingly focused on the battered notebook before him, filled with detailed maps and measurements from his years exploring the mines. but his awareness never left the bikers, cataloging their movements, their dynamics, the subtle tells that spoke of something darker brewing beneath their morning harassment. A memory surfaced. Another morning, years ago in Afghanistan, teaching young Special Forces recruits about explosive ordnance. The most dangerous opponent, he had told them, is the one you underestimate, the one you dismiss because they don't match your image of what a warrior looks like. The irony wasn't lost on him now. Sarah returned with the biker's order, professional but cold. As she passed Jack's seat, she paused. "I can ask them to leave, Jack. They're getting worse every time." "It's fine," he replied quietly, his voice carrying decades of patience. "Some battles choose their own time." Marcus's voice carried again, pitched to reach them. "Hey boys, you think if I end up old and toothless someday I'll get the special treatment too? Seems like a pretty sweet deal. Everyone feeling sorry for you, making excuses, treating you like you're made of glass." Jack turned slightly, posture unchanging but his mind already calculating angles, assessing threats, formulating responses. Not out of fear. It had been decades since he'd feared men like these, but from ingrained tactical habit. His apparent weakness wasn't a disadvantage. It was just another factor to consider, like terrain or weather in a combat situation. "You know what I heard?" Ray Castro leaned forward, eager to contribute. "My cousin says he used to work the mines back in the day. Probably spent all his money on wild claims, chasing fool's gold till his teeth fell out. Now he's just some crazy old-timer talking to himself in abandoned tunnels." The corner of Jack's mouth twitched slightly. Wild claims and fool's gold. If they only knew about the intricate network of tunnels he'd mapped, the strategic significance of each shaft and chamber, the deadly secrets he'd uncovered beneath the desert's burning surface. Sarah emerged from the kitchen, face flushed with anger. "That's enough," she snapped. "You want to act like children? You can take it outside. This is a saloon, not your personal playground." Marcus held up his hands in mock surrender. "Sorry, Sarah. Just making conversation. No law against that, right?" He stood, tossing some bills on the table. "Come on, boys. Atmosphere's a little stale in here anyway." As they headed for the door, Marcus deliberately knocked against Jack's table, sending coffee spilling across his notebook's pages. "Oops," he said, voice dripping with false concern. "Guess those old hands aren't as steady as they used to be, huh?" The saloon fell silent, waiting for a reaction, but Jack simply reached for a napkin, dabbing at the pages with the same steady calm he'd maintained through firefights and underground explosions. His eyes met Marcus's for the first time, and something in that steady gaze made the biker step back slightly. "Careful, son," Jack said quietly. "Coffee stains tend to spread in unexpected ways." Marcus covered his momentary unease with a laugh, leading his crew out to the waiting bikes. The engines roared to life, the sound echoing off the canyon walls as they peeled away, leaving dust and tension in their wake. Sarah hurried over with more napkins. "Jack, I'm so sorry. I should have stopped them sooner. You shouldn't have to deal with this." Jack closed the notebook carefully, the coffee-stained pages revealing glimpses of complex tunnel maps and annotated depths. "Everyone has to face their own battles, Sarah. Even arrogant young men who think strength comes from cruelty." He glanced at the coffee stains spreading across the detailed diagrams. "Sometimes the best strategy is letting your opponent think they've won the first round." Outside, the morning sun climbed higher over Red Rock Canyon, painting the rugged landscape in deceptively peaceful light. But in the Rattlesnake Saloon, the morning's quiet routine had been irreversibly disrupted. The war for control of the canyon's underground realm was about to begin, and its first shots had been fired over a spilled cup of coffee. The late afternoon heat still shimmered off the rocks as Jack made his way back to his small cabin on the outskirts of town. Everything in the modest structure had been carefully arranged, not to accommodate weakness, but to maximize efficiency. His workbench was covered with mining maps and geological surveys, each one marking another piece of the vast puzzle he'd spent years assembling. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Martha Chen's number flashed on the screen. The retired schoolteacher, despite her quiet demeanor, had always seemed to know when trouble was brewing in Red Rock County. "I heard about this morning," she said without preamble. Sarah called me. Those scorpions are getting worse, Jack. Jack moved to his study window, watching heat waves distort the desert landscape. You know something I don't, Martha? 3 small ranch owners have sold out this week. All of them had run-ins with Marcus's group. The sheriff won't touch it because of their connections to certain county officials, but something's very wrong out here. A truck door slammed outside. Sheriff Tom Miller was walking up Jack's gravel path, his uniform crisp despite the heat, but his expression troubled. Martha, I've got company. Keep me posted. The doorbell chimed as Jack ended the call. It's open, Tom. Miller entered, removing his hat, his face showing the strain of 15 years as Red Rock County's chief law enforcement officer. Jack, wish this was a social call. Coffee's fresh. Sarah's latest blend. They moved to the kitchen, Miller watching as Jack efficiently navigated the small space, retrieving mugs with practiced ease. Someone's been sabotaging equipment at the new mining operations, Miller said finally. The ones that just bought out those small ranchers, no witnesses, of course. Of course, Jack's voice remained neutral. Look, Jack, I know what happened at the saloon this morning. Sarah called it in, but without any direct threats. Miller spread his hands helplessly. The Scorpions have got half the county board in their pocket. One word from them and my department's funding gets cut in half. So the vulnerable suffer while the powerful protect their own. Jack placed a steaming mug before the sheriff. Tale as old as time, Tom. It's not that simple. The Scorpions' protection racket employs half the county. People are scared. These bikers, they know they're untouchable because no one's shown them otherwise. Jack's eyes held a glint that would have been familiar to his former Special Forces teammates. No one's untouchable, Tom. They just think they are because no one's taught them differently. Across town, Marcus Rodriguez slammed through the front door of his sprawling desert compound, anger radiating from every movement. His father's voice carried from the office, discussing another protection deal, always another deal, another scheme, another reason why Victor Rodriguez was too busy to notice his son's growing darkness. Problems, Marcus? Victor barely glanced up from his papers. That old prospector at the Rattlesnake giving you trouble? The toothless waste of space thinks he's something special. Marcus paced the room. Acts like he's better than everyone else, but he's nothing, just some broken-down desert rat who lost everything chasing fantasies in those mines. Victor looked up finally, eyes narrowing. Jack Hawkins? The one who's been mapping the old tunnel systems? You know him? Watch yourself with that one. Victor's voice carried a warning. He's got friends in town, respected people. Best to find another place for your morning entertainment. What, you scared of some old man who talks to rocks? Watch your tone. Victor's voice hardened. I've worked too hard building our operation to have you jeopardize it with childish harassment. Find another place to get breakfast. Marcus stormed out, texting his crew. They met at their usual spot behind the abandoned processing plant, where empty beer cans and cigarette butts marked their territory. My old man's worried about some toothless prospector's feelings, Marcus spat, pacing like a caged animal. Like we don't own this county. Mike Stinger Torres took a long pull from his beer. My uncle says Hawkins used to work with the military or something. Special projects in the mines decades ago. Who cares? Look what he's doing to us. Can't even get breakfast without him judging us with those quiet stares, like he knows something we don't. Derek Poison Phillips, usually the most cautious of the group, spoke up. Maybe we should just find somewhere else to hang out. Marcus rounded on him. You too? Everyone's so scared of the poor helpless prospector. Well, I'm not. He wants to play games. Let's show him what real power looks like. Back at the Rattlesnake, Sarah was closing up when Jack came through the back door. She'd given him a key years ago, trusting him more than most of her blood relatives. Thought you might come by, she said, pulling out 2 cups of fresh coffee. Martha called, told me about the kids dropping out of school. 3 families sold their ranches this week. Jack accepted the coffee, noting the worry lines around Sarah's eyes. Tom Miller stopped by. 3 pieces of mining equipment sabotaged. Yeah, it's getting worse, Jack. Everyone knows who's behind it, but Victor Rodriguez has got this county so scared of losing their protection money that no one will stand up to him or his son. A knock interrupted them. Martha Chen stood in the doorway, clutching a stack of papers. "You need to see this, Jack. Records from my teaching days before I retired. Look at the pattern." Jack studied the documents, seeing more than just academic records. "Protection racket isn't new, is it? Goes back decades." "Deeper than that," Martha replied. "The mines, the tunnels. Victor's father used them for smuggling in the 80s. Now, Victor and Marcus are expanding the operation, using intimidation to buy up land with access to the old tunnel systems." Sarah's hands tightened on her coffee cup. "What are they planning, Jack? All this pressure, these land grabs, it's worse than their usual protection schemes." "It's about the tunnels," Jack said quietly. "Always has been. Question is, what are they planning to move through them?" Outside, motorcycle engines roared past the saloon, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Another small act of defiance, another test of boundaries. But this time someone was watching who understood that the real battle wasn't on the streets of Red Rock County. It was for control of what lay beneath them. The morning calm at the local high school shattered with the sound of slamming lockers and frightened voices. Tommy Chen, Martha's nephew who wore his late father's mining company jacket, found himself surrounded by the scorpions. The hallway cleared instantly, other students turning away, pretending not to see. "Nice jacket, Chen." Marcus circled the younger boy. "Think wearing it makes you tough?" Tommy's voice shook, but he stood his ground. "Leave me alone, Rodriguez." "Or what? Going to call your uncle?" Ray Castro shoved Tommy hard against the lockers. "Oh, wait, can't do that anymore, can you?" Down the hall, Martha Chen watched from her classroom doorway, already reaching for her phone, but someone else had noticed. Jack Hawkins, arriving for his scheduled talk with the geology teacher about the region's underground water tables, wheeled silently around the corner. 4 against 1, Jack's quiet voice cut through the tension. Not exactly favorable odds. Marcus spun around, surprise quickly masked by arrogance. "Mind your own business, old man. This is school property." "Interesting choice of words." Jack's voice remained calm as he moved closer, his presence somehow filling the space. "Property, ownership, control. Tell me, does pushing around a dead miner's son make you feel powerful, Mr. Rodriguez?" The corridor fell silent. Tommy used the distraction to slip away, clutching his father's jacket. Marcus stepped forward, fists clenched, but something in Jack's steady gaze made him hesitate. Heavy footsteps approached as Robert Williams, the football coach, rounded the corner, his face darkening seeing his star quarterback facing off against a local prospector. "Rodriguez, my office, now all of you." Marcus's group skulked away, but not before Marcus shot Jack a look of pure hatred. "This isn't over." "No," Jack agreed quietly. "It's just beginning." Later in Williams's office, Jack listened as the coach vented his frustrations. "I can't suspend them. Victor Rodriguez would have my job before the day's over. But they're getting worse, Jack. The whole town's fracturing." "Fear does that," Jack replied, studying the maps he'd brought for his meeting with the geology teacher. "Creates divisions, breaks down community. You've got good kids watching bad things happen, feeling powerless to stop it. Like Tommy Chen, kid's got potential, wanted to work the search and rescue team after his father died in that mining accident last year. Instead, he's being terrorized by my own students." Jack's mind flashed to another young man years ago in the tunnels beneath Afghanistan, struggling with loss and anger. Sometimes the ones who need guidance most are the ones fighting hardest against it. Across town, Sarah Martinez was sharing similar concerns with Sheriff Miller over coffee. "Jack thinks there's something bigger going on with these mines. Says Marcus's targeting feels personal, focused on families with mining connections." Miller nodded grimly. "Victor Rodriguez has been pushing hard to buy up all the old mining claims. The Chen family's been fighting it, but their claim rights are tied up in legal battles since Tommy's father died. And now Marcus is targeting Tommy." Sarah gestured vaguely toward the school. "It's not random anymore, is it?" Back at the Rodriguez compound, Marcus paced his room like a caged animal, his father's voice carrying from below, arguing about mineral rights and access points. The same arguments, the same dismissive tone that had filled Marcus's life since his mother disappeared 3 years ago, last seen heading into the old tunnel system, claiming she had evidence about Victor's operations. His phone buzzed with messages from the crew. They were scared, questioning his leadership after Jack's intervention. Even Mike Torres, usually his strongest supporter, was suggesting they back off. Marcus hurled his phone across the room. The old prospector had humiliated him, made him look weak in front of everyone. Worse, he'd done it without raising his voice, without showing any fear. Just that calm, knowing stare that seemed to see right through Marcus's carefully constructed facade. At the VA office, Dr. Emily Porter updated Jack on Tommy Chen's condition. He's physically fine, but the psychological impact. These kids are targeting him specifically, Jack, using his father's death against him. They're targeting what he represents, Jack replied, watching old miners move through the office. Honest work, family legacy, everything their parents teach them to disregard in pursuit of easy money. Victor Rodriguez's tunnel operations? Part of it. But there's something else. Marcus's rage feels too personal, too focused on mining connections. Emily hesitated. That's confidential, Jack, but there were rumors when his mother vanished. Something about the old tunnel system, evidence she was gathering about Victor's operation. Jack absorbed this, pieces clicking into place. So Marcus learned early that strength means eliminating threats, and nothing threatens him more than people connected to those mines. What are you going to do? These kids need to learn that real strength isn't about intimidation. At the Rattlesnake after closing, Martha shared more disturbing news. They're planning something big, Jack. I overheard Ray and Luis talking, something about making an example, proving they can't be touched even after what happened at school. Sarah's hands shook as she poured coffee. They wouldn't actually hurt someone, would they? Jack's expression remained calm, but his mind was already gaming out scenarios. They're escalating, testing boundaries. Each confrontation pushes them closer to a line they can't uncross. The county fair's Friday, Martha added. The whole town will be there. If they're planning something public, then we need to be ready. Jack finished, moving to the window where Marcus's bike roared past, alone this time. Through the dusty glass, Jack caught a glimpse of the young man's face, anger warring with confusion, betrayal with desperate need for approval. I talked to his mother, Sarah said quietly. Found her in Phoenix. She's been trying to reach him, but Victor blocks every attempt. Said Marcus used to spend hours in the mines with his uncle before everything happened. That explains the targeting, Jack mused. Every mining family he attacks is really about his uncle, his mother, his own loss. Martha's phone buzzed, her face paling as she read the message. Jack, Marcus just posted online. He's planning something at the fair tomorrow, says he's going to show everyone what real power looks like. He's unraveling, Coach Williams said from the doorway. I should suspend him, but Rodriguez's lawyers would shut down the whole athletics department. Jack wheeled to the window, watching more students gather across the street. Tommy Chen was speaking to them, his father's mining jacket a banner of defiance. Mike Torres stood at his shoulder, choosing his new side. You're all looking at this wrong, Jack said finally. Marcus isn't the enemy. He's a weapon his father crafted and aimed. Tomorrow isn't about stopping him. It's about helping him see the truth. The truth? Miller asked. That real strength isn't about destroying what scares you. It's about facing it, understanding it. His father's been teaching him that power means crushing threats. Maybe it's time he learned what true power looks like. Sarah touched Jack's shoulder. What are you planning, Jack? Marcus needs to understand what happened to his uncle, why his mother really left, the kind of man his father really is. Victor Rodriguez will bury you, Miller warned. He's already making calls trying to get your mining claims revoked. Jack's laugh held no humor. I've faced worse than angry criminals in tunnels across Afghanistan. Rodriguez is used to winning because everyone's afraid of losing something. But some things are worth losing to protect what matters. Across town in the Rodriguez compound, Marcus sat in his darkened room, staring at old family photos. His mother's smile, his Uncle Carlos in his mining gear, happier times before money and power poisoned everything. His phone buzzed constantly. Messages from his crew, from Tommy Chen's growing group of supporters, from classmates choosing sides, but one message caught his eye. An unknown number. Your Uncle Carlos left something in Tunnel 7 the day he disappeared. Come alone tonight if you want the truth. At the Rattlesnake, Jack watched the sun set over Red Rock Canyon. Sarah wiped the already spotless counter, a nervous habit he'd noticed over the years. He'll come, Jack said quietly, the same way his uncle did looking for answers. Martha entered through the back door, clutching papers. Found these in the county records. Every person the Scorpions targeted. Direct connection to properties Victor wants for his tunnel operation. It wasn't random intimidation. It was strategic pressure. Applied through a teenager who just wanted his father's approval, Jack added, studying the documents. Classic tactic. Use someone's pain to make them a weapon. Victor probably didn't even realize he was doing it at first. Night fell over Red Rock Canyon, bringing with it a tense quiet. Tomorrow's county fair loomed like a storm on the horizon, but tonight would determine its outcome. Tonight, in a small saloon on the edge of the desert, a young man would finally learn the truth about his family's destruction and his own unwitting role in his father's schemes. Jack positioned himself near the window, watching the street. Years of Special Forces training had taught him that the most important battles weren't won with fists or explosives, but with truth and understanding. Marcus Rodriguez was about to face both, if he was strong enough to accept them. The old clock above the Rattlesnake's counter showed 10:45 p.m. when Marcus's custom motorcycle pulled into the darkened parking lot. He sat there for long moments, engine idling, headlights cutting through the desert dust. Finally, he killed the engine, plunging the street into darkness. Inside, Jack waited at his usual corner table. Sarah worked quietly in the kitchen, providing an excuse to keep the saloon open this late. The worn leather journal on Jack's table contained 3 years of carefully gathered evidence, the truth Marcus had been running from his entire life. The bell chimed softly as Marcus entered. Gone was the swagger, the practiced arrogance. He looked younger somehow, more vulnerable. You said you have something. His voice cracked slightly. About Uncle Carlos? Sit down, son. Jack gestured to the chair across from him. What I have is the truth. Question is, are you ready to hear it? Marcus sank into the chair, his leather jacket hanging loose on suddenly slumped shoulders. Why should I trust you? Because unlike your father, I have no reason to lie. Jack opened the journal, removing a photograph. This was taken the day Carlos disappeared, security camera at Mineshaft 7. Marcus's hands trembled as he took the photo, his uncle looking haunted and desperate, carrying a duffel bag full of documents. Dad said. He said Uncle Carlos just took off, couldn't handle the pressure of honest work anymore. Your uncle was handling honest work just fine until Victor's operation started targeting independent miners, specifically those with access to the old tunnel networks. Sarah emerged from the kitchen carrying coffee and something else, an old miner's helmet with a cracked lamp. Carlos left this here the day he disappeared, she said quietly. Asked me to keep it safe. Marcus stared at the helmet like it might bite him. What's in it? Evidence, Jack replied quietly. Records of your father's pressure tactics, lists of miners who'd been forced out, notes about using you to send messages. Using me? The color drained from Marcus's face. No, that's not. I chose those targets. Mister, did you? Or did your father suggest them? Casual comments about problem families, about people causing trouble for the business? Before Marcus could respond, the saloon door chimed again. Mike Torres entered, looking nervous but determined. He's right, Marcus. Remember last month? Your dad mentioned the Chens being difficult, and the next day you had us vandalize their equipment. Marcus's world tilted on its axis. Mike, what are you doing here? Called him, Jack said. Mike's been keeping records too, haven't you, son? Mike pulled out his phone. Started about 6 months ago. Every time your dad made a suggestion, every target that somehow connected to the tunnel system. Couldn't ignore the pattern anymore. Sarah placed the helmet in front of Marcus. Read it. Your uncle saw what was happening. Tried to stop it. With shaking hands, Marcus opened the helmet's hidden compartment. His uncle's familiar handwriting filled the pages. Dates, names, incidents, properties targeted, families pressured, and throughout, references to Victor using M to send messages. "This is why Mom left, isn't it?" Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. "She knew," Laura confirmed. "She found out." "Your mother came here looking for Carlos on the day he disappeared," Jack added carefully. "Your father followed him. There was an argument." Marcus's head snapped up. "Dad was here?" Jack pulled out another photo. Security footage showing Victor Rodriguez confronting Carlos outside the saloon. "Your father gave him a choice. Leave town permanently or watch your mother lose everything in a custody battle." Marcus remembered that night 3 years ago. His mother leaving, saying she needed time to think. But she was running, wasn't she? Running from him, from what he'd become. The sound of tires on gravel interrupted them. Headlights swept across the saloon windows as Victor Rodriguez's black SUV pulled up outside. "Right on schedule," Jack murmured. "Your father's got a tracker on your bike, Marcus." "Has for months." Marcus stared at his father's approaching figure, seeing him with new eyes. "All this time, everything I did, it was his plan?" "Not at first," Jack replied. "At first you were just an angry kid acting out. But your father saw an opportunity, started guiding that anger, directing it where he needed it." The saloon door burst open, Victor Rodriguez filling the frame with barely contained rage. "Marcus, get in the car." Marcus stood but not to obey, his hands clutching his uncle's helmet like a shield. "Did you do it? Did you drive Uncle Carlos away? Use me to hurt people?" "You don't understand business, son. Sometimes pressure needs to be applied. I simply pointed you in useful directions." "Useful?" Marcus's laugh held a bitter edge. "Like the Chens, the Martinezes, all those families, those kids I hurt. It was business?" Victor stepped forward, reaching for the helmet. "This is ridiculous. Jack's trying to turn you against me, against everything we've built." "Built on what?" Marcus backed away from his father's reach. "Threats? Intimidation? Using your own son as a weapon?" "You're my son," Victor snapped. "Everything I've done for your future. This county, this operation, it's all for you." "No." Marcus's voice strengthened. "It's for you. Always has been. Mom saw it. Uncle Carlos saw it. I was just too blind to see it." Jack wheeled slightly forward, positioning himself between father and son. "The question now, Marcus, is what are you going to do with the truth?" Victor Rodriguez's mask finally cracked. "What he's going to do is get in the car, go home, and forget this nonsense. Tomorrow's county fair, the new tunnel operation starts next week. Everything's been arranged." "Like you arranged Uncle Carlos's disappearance?" Marcus opened the helmet, pulling out a marked page. "It's all here, Dad. Every threat, every scheme, what you did to him, to Mom, to me. I made you strong." Victor's voice dropped dangerously. "You made me cruel," Marcus corrected quietly. "There's a difference." Sarah stepped forward, phone in hand. "Victor, Sheriff Miller's on his way. Carlos's evidence. He sent copies to federal investigators before he disappeared. They've been building a case." Victor Rodriguez's face contorted with rage and desperation. "You think you can stop progress? This county needs development, needs the tunnel operation. A few displaced miners, a few scared kids. Small price for prosperity." "That's where you're wrong," Jack said calmly. "The price was your son's soul, and he's finally choosing not to pay it anymore." Marcus moved to Jack's side, still clutching the helmet. "Tomorrow's county fair," he said, facing his father. "You're right about that. But not the kind you planned. I'm done being your weapon, Dad. Done hurting people to help you get richer." Victor Rodriguez's last vestige of control shattered. "Then you're no son of mine." "No," Marcus agreed sadly. "I'm my mother's son, and my uncle's nephew. And it's time I started acting like it." As Sheriff Miller entered the Rattlesnake, Jack watched the final confrontation between father and son. Tomorrow's fair would bring its own challenges, but tonight, in a small desert saloon, A young man had finally broken free from the chains of his father's manipulation. The price of truth was always high, but the cost of lies, of living as someone else's weapon, was far higher. Marcus Rodriguez had finally learned that lesson, just as his uncle had tried to teach him 3 years too late. Dawn broke over Red Rock Canyon, painting the sheriff's station in pale golden light. Marcus Rodriguez sat in Miller's office, his father's angry shout still echoing from the holding cells down the hall. The miner's helmet lay open on Miller's desk, its contents telling a story of corruption that had poisoned the county for years. "Your mother's on her way," Miller said quietly. "Should be here by noon. We've got a lot of questions about what happened 3 years ago." Marcus nodded numbly, still wearing yesterday's leather jacket like armor. "What happens now?" "That depends." Jack wheeled into the office, Sarah Martinez following with coffee. "Your father's lawyers will be here soon. They'll try to bury this, claim the evidence is inadmissible, pressure witnesses to stay quiet, like they did with Carlos." "Yes, but this time we're ready," Miller added. "This time there are too many witnesses, too much evidence." Outside Miller's office, Mike Torres paced the station lobby. He'd spent the night calling Scorpion members, sharing the truth about the Rodriguez family's tactics. The responses varied from shock to anger to shame at their own complicity. "Half the crew's waiting outside," Mike reported. "They want to talk to Marcus. Tommy Chen brought them." Marcus's hands tightened around his coffee cup. "Why would they want to talk to me after everything I've done?" "Because they understand being manipulated," Jack replied. "Your father didn't just use you, Marcus. He used this whole county's fears and ambitions against itself." Sarah's phone buzzed. "County board's calling an emergency meeting. Victor's supporters are pushing to cancel the fair for public safety." "Can't have their power display disrupted," Miller muttered. "Rodriguez has got 3 board members in his pocket." "Let them cancel it," Marcus said suddenly. "I don't deserve to be there anyway." "That's where you're wrong." Jack turned to face him fully. "Running away doesn't fix anything. Believe me, I know. What am I supposed to do? Walk out there and pretend everything's normal? You walk out there and show them what real courage looks like. Face what you've done. Make it right." The station door opened as Tommy Chen entered, followed by several former Scorpion members still wearing their leather jackets. The tension in the room could have been cut with a knife. "We read the evidence," Tommy said quietly. "About your uncle, your mom, about what your father was really doing with the Scorpions." Marcus couldn't meet their eyes. "I'm sorry. I know it doesn't fix anything, but—" "No," Tommy agreed. "It doesn't. But what you do next might." Jack watched the exchange carefully. "Tommy's right. Your father used the Scorpions to divide this county. Maybe it's time the crew helped heal it instead." Outside, a crowd was gathering. News of Victor Rodriguez's arrest had spread like wildfire through Red Rock Canyon. Miners and their families stood alongside ranch owners who'd resisted the Scorpions' pressure, but there were others too. Business owners who'd benefited from Victor's protection, families worried about losing their livelihood. "Towns splitting in half," Miller observed grimly. "Towns are like people," Jack replied. "Sometimes they need to face their wounds before they can heal." Sarah returned from calling Marcus's mother. "She's an hour out. Says she's got more evidence, documents Carlos gave her before he disappeared." Marcus stood abruptly. "I need to see the crew, all of them." "You sure about this?" Mike asked. "No, but Jack's right. Running away doesn't fix anything." They moved to the station's front steps. The morning sun had risen fully now, illuminating the gathered crowd. Marcus Rodriguez, who'd terrorized the county like he owned it just yesterday, looked small and young in the harsh light. "I know you all hate me," his voice carried across the suddenly quiet street. "You should. What I did, what my father made me do, it was wrong. All of it." Tommy Chen stepped forward. "Nobody hates you, Marcus. We hate what you did. There's a difference." "The county fair," Marcus continued. "It's not just a fair anymore, is it?" "It's a choice," Jack said from behind him. "Your father wanted it to be a show of power. You can make it something else." Mike Torres joined them. "The crew's with you, Marcus, not because you're Rodriguez's son, but because you're finally standing up to him." More former Scorpions emerged from the crowd. Ray Castro, whose father managed the Rodriguez properties, stepped forward first. "We all knew something was wrong. We just didn't want to see it." Sarah watched from the doorway, remembering another morning 3 years ago when Carlos Rodriguez had shown similar courage. "History repeats," she murmured to Jack. "But sometimes the ending changes." Marcus faced his former victims, his crew, his county. "I can't undo what I did. Can't fix everything I broke. But I want to try. Starting today. Starting with the truth." He held up his uncle's helmet. "Everything's in here. Every family we pressured. Every person we targeted. It wasn't random. It wasn't just intimidation. It was business. My father's business." The crowd stirred, but Marcus pressed on. "The new tunnel operation starting next week, it's not about mining. It's about erasing evidence, erasing the people who fought for this county, who tried to expose the truth. People like my uncle, people like Mr. Hawkins." Jack's quiet voice carried clearly in the morning air. "The question isn't what you did yesterday, son. It's what you choose to do today." Marcus squared his shoulders, facing the county that had watched him grow from angry child to his father's weapon. "I choose to make it right, starting with the fair, not as a show of power, but as a way to bring people together, to start healing what my father broke." The crowd's mood shifted, hope mixing with lingering anger. Tommy Chen extended his hand. "Together then, all of us." As Marcus grasped Tommy's hand, sirens wailed in the distance. Victor Rodriguez's lawyers had arrived, ready to try burying the truth once more. But this time, in the clear light of morning, a son had chosen a different path than his father. The war for Red Rock Canyon's soul wasn't over, but for the first time, the battle lines weren't drawn between strong and weak, rich and poor, but between truth and lies, between those who would heal and those who would keep the wounds festering. Maria Rodriguez's dusty pickup pulled into the sheriff's station parking lot exactly at noon. Marcus, who'd been watching from the window, went completely still. 3 years of absence hung between mother and son as she emerged from the truck, looking both familiar and strange. "She tried, you know," Sarah said softly, watching with him. "Your father's lawyers threatened to destroy her if she fought for custody. Same choice he gave your uncle. Leave quietly or lose everything." "Why didn't she tell me?" Marcus's voice cracked. "Would you have believed her then?" Jack asked. "Over your father's explanations?" Before Marcus could answer, the station's doors burst open. Maria Rodriguez rushed in, freezing at the sight of her son. Gone was the angry young boy she'd left behind. In his place stood someone older, wearier, wrestling with hard truths. "Marcus?" She stepped forward hesitantly. He met her halfway, the walls he'd built crumbling. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know about Uncle Carlos, about any of it." While mother and son reunited, Victor Rodriguez's lawyers descended on the station. 3 suits from Phoenix, led by Richard Maxwell, the same attorney who'd handled Carlos's disappearance. "This is harassment," Maxwell declared, waving court papers. "Mr. Rodriguez was simply protecting his business interests. As for these allegations about his son's activities, teenagers will be teenagers." Sheriff Miller stood his ground. "Teenagers don't systematically target specific families by accident, counselor. The pattern's clear. Circumstantial. That helmet's hearsay at best. And now you've dragged Mrs. Rodriguez into this vendetta. The courts won't look kindly on such obvious manipulation of a minor." "Tell them, Marcus." Maria turned from her son, eyes flashing. "Tell them what really happened." Marcus stepped forward, still holding his uncle's helmet. "Every word's true. Dad, he'd mention problems with certain families. Next day, I'd find reasons to target their kids. It wasn't random. None of it was random." Maxwell's smile turned cold. Teenage rebellion being misconstrued as conspiracy. Tragic, really. Perhaps time with his mother has confused the boy's loyalties. "Only thing confusing," Jack spoke up, "is how long Victor Rodriguez's money kept people quiet. But money can't bury truth forever." Across town, the county board meeting erupted into chaos. Martha Chen watched as Rodriguez supporters clashed with mining families over the fair. "This is bigger than a fair," Board President Wilson declared. "The tunnel operation means jobs, growth. We can't let unfounded accusations derail progress." "Unfounded?" Tommy Chen's mother stood, trembling with rage. "My husband died exposing Rodriguez's operation. Now you want to use our children as pawns in your smuggling scheme?" Mike Torres and the former Scorpions sat together, a united front. Coach Williams stood with them, finally free to speak. These boys were manipulated, used to pressure families. Canceling the fair doesn't erase that. Let them show this county what real unity looks like. Back at the station, Maria shared her own evidence. Emails between Victor and his lawyers about Carlos, about using Marcus to send messages to problem families, records of payoffs to keep people quiet. "I wanted to fight," she told her son, but Victor threatened to destroy Carlos's reputation, expose his findings about the smuggling operation, said he'd make sure you grew up seeing your uncle as a criminal instead. "Instead," Marcus replied bitterly, "he made sure I became something worse." "You became what he shaped you to be," Jack wheeled closer. "Question is, who do you choose to be now?" Sarah burst in with news from the board meeting. "They're deadlocked. Rodriguez's supporters want to cancel the fair for public safety, but the crew's refusing to back down." Marcus stood. "I need to be there." "You sure?" his mother asked. "Victor's lawyers? I'm done hiding from truth, done letting him use me to hurt people." They arrived at the board meeting to find the battle lines drawn. Rodriguez supporters on one side, led by Maxwell and his legal team. On the other, mining families, students, and former Scorpions united behind Tommy Chen and Mike Torres. Marcus walked into the tension, feeling every eye turned to him. His father's son, the former gang leader, the heir to Rodriguez's empire of intimidation. But something had changed. In his hands he carried his uncle's helmet, and at his back walked his mother, Jack, and the truth. "You want to cancel the fair," he addressed the board directly. "Because you're afraid of what people might see? Good. They should see. See what happens when money matters more than morals, when fathers use their sons as weapons." Maxwell stepped forward. "Marcus, your father's concerned about your emotional state." "My father's concerned about his empire," Marcus cut him off. "About keeping people afraid, using me to keep them afraid. But I'm not his weapon anymore." Maria Rodriguez moved to her son's side. "Tell them about Carlos, Marcus. Tell them what Victor really did to this county." The room fell silent as Marcus opened the helmet's hidden compartment. 3 years ago, my uncle tried to stop Rodriguez's smuggling operation. My father gave him a choice: disappear or be destroyed. He gave my mother the same choice, used me to enforce those choices on anyone who resisted. He faced the board, his former crew, his county. The fair shouldn't be canceled. It should be played out, not as a show of Rodriguez's power, but as proof that this county's stronger than fear, stronger than bullies, stronger than money. Tommy Chen stood. "We're having that fair tomorrow. All of us. Together." The boardroom erupted in cheers and arguments, but something had shifted. The truth, so long buried under money and fear, had finally broken free, and with it, the chance for real healing began. Jack watched it all, seeing the strength he'd always known was there emerge in these young men. Tomorrow's fair would be more than celebration. It would be a battle for Red Rock Canyon's soul, played not with threats or intimidation, but with courage and truth. The kind of battle, Jack thought, watching Marcus stand with those he'd once terrorized, that can only be won by those who understand that real strength isn't about domination, but about facing hard truths and choosing to be better than your past. The Rattlesnake Saloon hummed with nervous energy as night fell over Red Rock Canyon. The former Scorpions crowded the tables, their usual divisions forgotten. Marcus sat with Tommy Chen and Mike Torres, their unlikely alliance a symbol of how much had changed in 24 hours. "Maxwell's filed for an emergency injunction," Sheriff Miller reported, joining Jack at his usual corner table, claiming the fair poses a public safety risk. "Of course he did," Jack watched the boys planning tomorrow's events. Victor Rodriguez can't let his son's rebellion go unanswered. Maria Rodriguez entered, still wearing her travel clothes, carrying a thick envelope. Found these in my old files. Proof that Victor knew exactly what he was doing with Marcus, with the Scorpions, using teenage rivalries to pressure families to abandon their mining claims. Sarah brought fresh coffee, studying the gathered faces. Some she'd known since they were children, watching them grow from innocent kids into Rodriguez's unwitting enforcers. Now they sat together, trying to rebuild what money and manipulation had broken. "It's not just about the fair anymore," Marcus said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Dad's lawyers are trying to stop us because they know what it means, us standing together. It shows their power's breaking." Ray Castro, whose father still managed Rodriguez properties, stood up. "My dad got fired today. Said it was worth it, finally standing up to them." "They can't fire everyone," Mike Torres added. "Can't threaten everyone. Not anymore." Jack wheeled closer to the group. "Your father built his power on isolation, Marcus, making everyone feel alone in their fear. But people aren't alone anymore." Outside, truck engines roared as more vehicles arrived. Tommy Chen's mother led a group of mining families carrying boxes of old photographs, pictures of the tunnel system in its early days when Carlos Rodriguez had first discovered evidence of the smuggling operation. "Your uncle had proof," Maria told her son, spreading the photos across the table. "The tunnel network wasn't just for mining. It was a massive smuggling route. Victor saw only profit potential." Marcus picked up a photo of his uncle in mining gear, standing proud before one of the main shafts. Is he really gone?" The saloon fell silent, waiting for Maria's response. She exchanged a look with Jack before speaking. He's in witness protection in Oregon. Victor's threats drove him away, but he never stopped gathering evidence, never stopped trying to expose the truth. Marcus's hands trembled. "He's alive? All this time?" "Victor made sure I couldn't tell you," Maria's voice cracked. "Said he'd use your testimony to discredit Carlos completely, destroy any chance of the truth coming out." Jack watched Marcus absorb this news, seeing the final pieces of his father's manipulation revealed. Your father understood that fear of losing something is stronger than fear of pain. He used that knowledge like a weapon. Sarah's phone buzzed with news from Martha. County boards called another emergency session. Maxwell's presenting evidence that the fair would destabilize community relations. "More like destabilize Rodriguez's control," Sheriff Miller growled. Marcus stood suddenly. "We need to go there, all of us. Show them they can't keep burying the truth." Tommy Chen joined him. "The whole crew, everyone. Everyone who's tired of being afraid." The saloon emptied as former gang members and mining families headed for their vehicles. Jack held Marcus back for a moment. "Your father's lawyers will try to provoke you," he warned. "Make you angry, make you look unstable, prove their point about public safety." Marcus nodded, understanding. "Like they did to Uncle Carlos. But I'm not alone this time." Maria touched her son's shoulder. "No, you're not. And neither was Carlos. He just didn't know it then." They arrived at the county board meeting to find Maxwell and his legal team already presenting their case. Photos of past Scorpion incidents, carefully selected to suggest random violence rather than calculated intimidation. "These young men are volatile," Maxwell argued smoothly. "A public gathering like tomorrow's fair would invite chaos." "Only chaos," Marcus's voice cut through the room, "is what my father created. Using kids to threaten families, using money to buy silence." The former Scorpions filed in behind him, no longer divided between intimidators and victims. Tommy Chen carried his father's mining helmet. Mike Torres wore his leather jacket with new purpose. "You want to talk about public safety?" Marcus continued. "Let's talk about making miners homeless for profit. About using teenage gangs to terrorize families who resist. About driving good men like my uncle into hiding to protect your smuggling operation." Maxwell's smile turned cold. "Your father's concerned about your mental state, Marcus. These paranoid accusations." "Aren't paranoid," Maria stepped forward, opening her envelope. "Everything's documented, every threat, every tactic, including your role, Mr. Maxwell, in forcing my silence about Carlos." The room erupted in chaos as she began distributing copies of emails, transcripts, proof of years of systematic intimidation. "The fair happens tomorrow," Coach Williams declared. "These boys have earned the right to show this county what real unity looks like, what real strength looks like." Board President Wilson sputtered protests, but the mood had shifted. Rodriguez's lawyers couldn't fight the united front of former enemies and awakened conscience. Later, back at the Rattlesnake, Sarah served coffee to the celebrating teens. Jack watched Marcus sitting with his former victims, working to rebuild trust one conversation at a time. "Think Victor will try something tomorrow?" Sarah asked quietly. "Count on it," Jack replied. "Men like him don't surrender power easily. But he's fighting shadows now, afraid of truth, of exposure, of losing control." Marcus approached their table, looking both exhausted and determined. "Thank you for helping me see the truth, for not giving up on me." "You did the hard part," Jack said, choosing to face that truth, to make it right. Outside, the desert night settled over Red Rock Canyon. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but tonight, in a small saloon, former enemies sat together, planning fair activities, sharing stories, healing wounds that money and power had failed to permanently inflict. The war for the county's soul wasn't over, but for the first time, those fighting for truth and reconciliation outnumbered those fighting for profit and power. And that, Jack knew, was a victory Victor Rodriguez's money couldn't buy. Fair day dawned clear and bright over Red Rock Canyon. Jack watched from the fairgrounds entrance as families streamed in, former enemies now united in celebration. The tunnel system that had once harbored dark secrets now stood as a monument to truth's power. Marcus Rodriguez led the transformed Scorpions in community service, helping set up booths alongside mining families. His father's lawyers had retreated, their threats powerless against united resistance. The evidence was overwhelming. Victor Rodriguez's empire would face justice. "Look at them," Maria said to Jack, watching her son work alongside Tommy Chen. "Who would have thought?" "Sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't what's hidden in the tunnels," Jack replied, "but what happens when people stop being afraid to stand together." The fair became more than celebration. It was Red Rock Canyon's declaration of independence from fear. Former victims and bullies ran booths together, shared stories, and showed their community what real strength looked like. As the sun set over the canyon walls, Marcus stood with his mother, his uncle's mining helmet held close. "Think we'll see Uncle Carlos again?" "Truth has a way of bringing people home," Jack said quietly, "just like it has a way of showing us who we really are." The desert wind carried laughter and music across the fairgrounds, not the sound of power maintained through fear, but of strength found in standing together, proving that sometimes the greatest victories come not from what we hide in the darkness, but what we dare to bring into the light.